Okay.
There we go. Good afternoon, everybody. Today is the 27th day of January, 2021. You are live with the Senate Institutions Committee from the Vermont State Senate. I am Joe Benning, the chair of the committee. We also have Senator Ingalls from Essex Orleans, Senator McCormick from Windsor County, Senator Mazza from Grand Isle, and Senator Parent from Franklin County. We are here today to talk about the pension situation, and let me make a brief explanation. Actually, before I do that, I want to remind everybody that while you are entitled to make comments, this being a YouTube open channel, I would ask you to keep in mind that this is a family-oriented proceeding. And if you have comments you want to make, just keep in mind that there may be young viewers watching at some point in time. We'd appreciate it if you'd keep it clean. Turning to the issue at hand, we're talking about the pension report that was just recently issued by the Treasurer's Office. The reason that this committee is actually involved in that conversation has to do with our overall funding. This discussion has to do with how we eventually receive our funding and what the Treasurer tells us we are authorized to bond for. And Madam Treasurer, I'll introduce you in a moment, but I'm assuming we're going to get into that conversation. But for those of you that may be questioning why this committee is getting into this conversation at all, you should know that this is part and parcel of how this committee actually gets its funds. So with that, our first witness is the Treasurer, Beth Pearce. Appreciate you coming out to join us. And if we could just back up a hair and remind everybody who you are and how you fit into the Capitol bill conversation.
Well, certainly. And first, I'd like to introduce two of my staff that are on the call. I always say I have the best staff in the state, and then a few of the other constitutional officers give me that eye, but I do. And I have Ashlyn Doyon with me, who's our policy director, and William Krewald, who is our chief financial officer, who oversees the area that actually does our bond work. So very critical folks, both of them. And this is definitely related to bonds for two reasons. Number one, as you mentioned, the amount of money that we're recommending from the Capital Debt Affordability Committee. And second, we plan on issuing bonds possibly in March. And I have to tell you that the direction that we're going in pensions will be critical to how those bonds are viewed in the investor community. So I think that they're interrelated, and would like to go through that process with you. And I'll start with the bonding. We talked a little bit about that in the last meeting. And again, Mr. Chair, if I'm going over things we've already gone over and you would like me to move on, please let me know. And if I'm getting into the weeds, I always say that, when you ask me where the light switch is, I give you the principles of electricity. So,
some committees are possessed with an automatic mute button, but in my committee, it's an ejector seat, so be prepared.
There you go. I'll remember that. So we are currently rated AA plus by Moody's, and AA plus, AA1, which is the second highest rating from Moody's, and AA plus from Fitch. And those were downgrades back in 2018, October of 18 by Moody's, and Fitch downgraded us in July of 19. We recently had our rating affirmed by S&P, which was recently the second highest rating again, but they also had a negative outlook on it, which is a wake-up call to all of us. When you look at these issues, the primary issue has been the demographics in the workforce. And frankly, the bonds are in there. The pensions are in there. There's concern. There was also some belief that we were moving on these things and doing the right things, paying the ADAC, for instance, the actuarially determined employer contribution. And in fact, when you take a look at the Moody's rating, the bonds, although they were not the highest scoring area, in any event, frankly, during the downgrade, that was not a factor that moved down. It was primarily demographics and workforce. That said, I believe the situation has changed significantly as we move forward, and be happy to go through that in just a minute. The funding that you have, and we did have the capital debt affordability meetings. I am the chair of that committee, but I think we also got a great committee there. And we take a look every year and take a look at the biennium, whether we need to change or to make a recommendation with respect to the amount of money that you have for the issuance of bonds or recommendation. Now that recommendation is advisory to both the governor and the General Assembly. It has never been exceeded in the history of CDAC. And that's something we get a ton of points with the rating agencies, not just, in terms of the percentages. I've had folks say, well, it's a very small percentage of your total debt, when you add in pensions, OPEB, and Medicaid and other hard costs.
So Beth, can I just interrupt you for a second?
Yeah.
For the benefit of new legislators, as well as any members of the public who are tuning into us for the first time, could you just briefly describe what CDAC is and how it impacts your decisions with us?
Absolutely. So CDAC, again, is the Capital Debt Affordability Advisory Committee, and it was established in 1989, and it was established because we had a lot of debt on our books, and frankly, that was part of the reason we lost our bond ratings, AAA rating from Moody's back in the 70s. We annually look at what the amount of debt is, take a look at a number of ratios, including debt per capita, debt as a percentage of revenues, which is essentially taking the GDP numbers, and debt as debt service as a percentage of revenues. How much debt are we issuing compared to our revenues base, and debt as a percentage of personal income, taking a look at the entire income, divide that, in terms of our debt. The debt is per capita is an item that is useful, but I think the other two are more illustrative of the issues around it. Debt as a percentage of revenues, debt service, again, how much you pay each year out in debt service as a percentage of the state revenues, is an indicator of state affordability. And debt as a percentage of personal income is an indicator of taxpayer affordability. And I think that those two criteria, we have not been moving in the right direction of late. We've seen some deterioration of our position vis-a-vis the state medians. As we look at this, there are a couple of reasons for that. One is we see belt tightening in a number of states in terms of the amount of debt issuance that they've had. There's a lot of refunding activity with low interest rates, but there isn't a lot of new debt issuance. And that's, we think, again, is belt tightening. There may be some deferred revenue in there. We're going to try to do this later. We also think that as we look at this, that there's more cash as opposed to debt going to do the capital projects. The governor yesterday mentioned instead of borrowing for housing, that he would increase his recommendation, increase the VHCB appropriation. I believe it was $20 million. I think that's a great thing, that we're looking at cash as opposed to borrowing, because that borrowing costs upwards of 28% in terms of the issuing cost in the total bond. And for me, I'd rather be spending dollar for dollar rather than putting some of that into the hands of bond holders in the form of interest. But getting back to the role of CDAC, we take a look at those criteria. We take a look at what's called moral obligation, the way our credit enhances other organizations such as VEDA, the Vermont Economic Development Authority, the Municipal Bond Bank that is responsible for the infrastructure capital dollars for a variety of municipalities and entities. VHFA, the Vermont Housing Finance Agency, they rely on our bond rating for what's called moral obligation too, for affordable housing, primarily multifamily housing. So it's very important that we size our capital debt accordingly, and be conservative in that. And I think, be very candid, we've given you less money over the years to work with, because we need to reduce our appetite for debt. And this year's, the last 3 years, excuse me, since 2014, we reduced the amount of those recommendations on debt issuance by 23%. So we think that we're moving in the right direction. This year, the first year of the 2022-2023 biennium, we're holding off and leaving it level funded to the prior years in terms of our recommendation. So $123,180,000 for a 2-year period. In addition to that, if you have unused dollars from other projects, they get recycled back in. To the extent we have bond premium, which we don't right now because we haven't issued bonds in quite some time. But that's the dollar amount that the governor's office, the administration, starts to work with to take a look at their recommendations to you on how much to spend on buildings, how much to spend on other infrastructure that the state has. And then you get to take a look at that and make your own judgments about how that should be distributed. And we hope, again, that you do not exceed that recommendation. With COVID, the committee felt that making a further reduction was not appropriate at this time, but we want to continue that trend. As I said, 23% since reduction in bond recommendations, issuance recommendations since authorization recommendations since 2014, and again, 23%. I don't know if that answers all your questions about CDAC, Senator.
It does, thank you.
Thank you. So since that time, as I said, pensions has definitely been in the mix. OPEBs, which is other post-employment benefits, which is health insurance, have clearly been in the mix as they've looked at our ratings. I think it's going to be even more so as we move forward. This year, we did an experience study. So pensions valuations are based on a certain level of assumptions. How many people are going to retire? What's the mortality of the people that are retirement? How long are they going to live in retirement? What is the turnover of staff? What are the salaries that staff have? And also economic. What's the rate of inflation and the interest rate? What is the rate of return that we expect to have on our pension investments? We do have over $5 billion in the bank on investments for pension funds, and that will continue to grow. But so do the liabilities. And this year, when we did the assumption review, so every 5 years, we take those assumptions and we put them into the mix, and we have an actuary look and say these are what we think the changes to those assumptions need to be, and then the boards will look at it and make a decision to adopt those. Sometimes we send the actuary back for more research, but we do depend on an independent actuary to make those recommendations. We did that, and as a consequence of that, and the valuation that we did in October of this year, the end of October, the unfunded liability combined for both the teacher and the state plan, where the employer contribution is funded by the state, the total unfunded liability increased by $604 million. That's a sizable increase. And then the ADEC, which is the actuarially determined employer contribution, it's the amount that the actuary recommends to be funded this year so that you can continue to pay down that liability like a mortgage over a period of time. And in statute, that period of time is 2038. That amount went up from our records, $96.6 million. That's a heck of a lot of money to increase, the ADEC, and that's not a 1-year number. That number is going to continue to grow over time. So that's an annual number that will have some growth associated with it, and that's a big number. That's a big change, and because of those changes, both retirement boards, the teacher and the state board, directed the treasurer's office to look at ways to lower the unfunded liability, to lower the ADEC back to the 21 levels. And we've been working on that with our stakeholders, the teacher and the state board, as well as the employee groups. We're bringing in the General Assembly, and we hope that the administration is part of that. And I was pleased with the governor's comments in his budget speech yesterday that they do want to be involved in that process. So we sent over a series of recommendations on the 15th of January. And that begins the discussion with you folks about the changes that we make. Both the systems are in somewhat precarious positions. The state system, which is called VESARS, the Vermont State Employees Retirement System, 66.4% funded. Now, again, we have $5 billion in investment dollars and assets, but we also have liabilities. There's a difference between the liabilities and the assets available, and that results in a 66.4%. I'm just looking at my numbers, funded position for the state. Now, the General Accountability Office, GAO, says that states that 80% is a good funding position. The Society of Actuaries would say 80% is good, but you also have to have a trajectory that's going in the right direction. In 2007, the state system was fully funded. It was at 100.8, not 108, but 100.8. The Great Recession happened. We dropped into the high, at one point, the low 80s, the high 70s. And then as I look at the numbers, 77.7, 76.8, 75.1, 74.6, 71, 70.7, and now 66.4. We aren't at 80%, and we're going in the wrong direction. And that concerns me. We've looked under the hood to see what's going on there. The experience study helped us with that, and we need to make some changes. For the teacher system, it's even more critical. Because of underfunding, back in 1990, beginning there and all the way through 2007, the state underfunded what the actuary said you need to put into the system. One year in particular, it was 38% of what the actuary recommended. Now, I use the analogy of schools and you trying to get to a point where your child has enough money in place to go do post-secondary education, whether it's a trade or whether it's through a college, and you need to put money aside for that college education. If you start to do that in your sophomore year of high school, or that child's sophomore year of high school, you're not going to make your finance goal. You need to do it back in preschool, and you need to do it every single year. Because if you say, well, I can't do it this year, but I'll make up for it next year. Next year it doesn't happen. The year after that, it doesn't happen. And you can't invest a promise. You can't invest, I'll do it next year. You need to have dollars in the system to invest. Because 60 cents out of every single payment that's made to a retiree, 60 cents out of every dollar is through investment earnings. So the teacher system, because of that underfunding, came into the Great Recession less well-funded. They were about 84.9%. And they've had a similar trend. They've gone down 65, 63, 61, 60, 58, 55, and now they're at 51.3% funded. I think that a critical mass is at 50% and going into the 40s. And we're really concerned that is not sustainable in that situation. I did a quick calculation of taking what's called the normal cost, which is not the unfunded liability, but the amount of pension you need to put aside every year. So for instance, when I retire or when Will retires or Ashlyn retires, that you put aside an amount every year that you need. So by the time we all reach retirement, my probabilities of when will be a little different than Ashlyn, who's much younger than me, or Will. But putting that aside, that's called normal cost plus the unfunded liability. The ADEC that I'm projecting at this point in time, and it's preliminary, is that by 2038, the amount of contribution will be over $500 million. We're talking about a $500 million contribution to pensions. And I'm not sure well, I am sure that that's not a position that we can continue to move on forward on. We need to make some changes. So we've done a report, and the positions, the recommendations we made are extraordinarily painful, and I get that. And I wish I could be giving better information and less painful recommendations on this, but I don't think we can.
Can I just stop you before you get into those details? Because we do want to hear them. But the rating agencies, I'm assuming, are watching all of this as we go forward. How often do they actually meet and assess what our rating should be?
Sure. So all three rating agencies in November and December took a look at our ratings. They've done that across the board. Number one, since we haven't gone out, the process is to do it every 2 years, and we were bumping up to that. So the rating agencies, because we had not gone out for bonding. In addition to that, they've been looking at it from the perspective of the impacts of COVID. We were fortunate in that process because a number of entities, large municipalities and states saw either a downgrade or a reduction in their outlook. And in fact, in Standard & Poor's case, there was a negative outlook attached to our rating. Our plan is to go out someplace around March. That can change a little bit. We had a conversation today with Bond Counsel. We continue to have conversations with our financial advisor. If we're not making significant, I know that you can't pass a bill before March, but if there isn't a direction that would or something that would indicate that we're dealing with this, I believe that we have a very high probability of seeing a rating downgrade. I can't speak for the rating agencies. In fact, they wouldn't like it if I was speaking for them. They do their own independent analysis, but we do have significant risk to the bond rating if we do nothing. And that will increase the cost of capital, which increased the cost for the state, but because of our moral obligation, it would also increase the cost for housing. It would increase the cost of economic development, and to some extent, they increase the cost for the infrastructure municipalities through the bond bank. So it has significant ramifications. And again, our expectation is we'll probably go out in March. It's possible we could extend it out to April or May. I don't believe we will. But they will grade us at that point when we're issuing bonds. And I think we need to get our house in order before that. We also need to take a look at our demographics and workforce. And I think that we're making some of the right moves there and using some of those one-time revenues for needed services, but not building one-time revenues into the base. I think the other thing we need to take a good look at is increasing our reserves. That's something those rainy day funds serve you well, and it's something the rating agencies look at. So if I'm looking at what we have under our control, reserves, increasing those, fully funding the ADEC, reducing the pension liabilities, and resisting the urge to use one-time money for ongoing costs and services, and finally reducing our appetite for debt, which is something we've been working on.
Senator Parent, did you have a question?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So one of the questions I know we're talking, but the piece that I've been interested in, Treasurer Pierce, is I'm a new member to the VEMRS program for my day job, and I'm required to put away 10.5%, and it's actually going up to 10.75 on July 1, and my employer has to put away almost 8%. Reading the teacher pension and the state employees pension, it's around 5-6. What's this rough? If you were to look at roughly the VEMRS program, you have to put 20% of salary in. What are we roughly have been putting away in our teacher and state programs between us and the state as a percentage of payroll?
It's over 21, but that includes healthcare. I don't have the breakout between the healthcare, OPEB, and the pensions. Now, you said 10%. In the municipal system, there's 4 different groups, A, B, C, and D. I'm assuming you're in either C, perhaps?
Yep.
Group C, so it has a higher percentage. Group A has a lower benefit and a lower contribution, employer and employee contribution. B has a slightly better benefit program. You'll be happy to know C is, while you have to put in more, it's got a better benefit associated with that. And D is primarily law enforcement. So be happy with that. Yes, you have to contribute more, but it'll be a better pension for you in the end.
Well, my point is, as a, municipal employee, they're putting in almost double what a teacher and a state employee is asked to put in. So even though it's not state funded, you look at it where two have issues, one doesn't. It seems to me, part of your recommendation is we haven't ever asked the employees to put in, even in a 401k, if you're only putting in 5%, particularly in a 401k, you're never going to be able to retire.
Sure. I'm going to ask Will to take a look on that group plan in our retirement, so we can pick up the municipal with the ranges for the employer and the employee contribution, if you can get there, which is in the retirement.
Yep.
Then pick, you know where to go.
So Beth,
Yes.
I have the actuarial reports for VSERS and VSTERS up, which will give me what the percentage of payroll contribution is for the ADEC.
Yes.
Would you want those numbers as well?
Yes, please. Yes, and then we'll go to the municipal.
So for the year
Well,
ended,
just before you do, let me pause here and ask if any other senators have any questions thus far. Senator McCormick.
Thanks, Madam Secretary, Madam Treasurer. Is clearly COVID has hurt us financially, so it's put us in a weaker position. But do we get any forgiveness or forbearance or tolerance because of COVID? In other words, that it's not as though we've been profligate and irresponsible with the money. We got hit by hard times.
Yeah.
And do they like give us a break because of that, or is it just the opposite? Because the money's not so good, we're in more trouble.
Well, I think that we actually did well in one respect by having adequate reserves. I think we need to increase them. Just like at home, you have a rainy day fund. So if you have an event, unemployment, or you have a big expense, a healthcare expense or something you didn't anticipate, hopefully you have that money in the bank to cover some of those. We had good reserves coming into COVID. So our cash position was very good, and we did not have to go out and borrow. Other states did have to go out and borrow, some as early as a few weeks into COVID. The rating agencies were looking at a number of things: a continued look at pensions, a continued look at workforce, a continued look at economy and demographics, but they were also looking at liquidity during this period, because they want to make sure you could pay your bills and be in a good financial position, and we were. And I think that was one of the reasons we did not see, at least in Moody's and Fitch, any change in our outlook or a further downgrade of our numbers during the crisis. When we come to March, again, when we did these ratings, we did not have the full numbers available. We did for S&P, we did provide those, but we're going to be evaluated again based on what we've done, what the legislative session looks like, and where our pensions are, and that additional $604 million of pension liabilities will weigh heavily on those ratings.
One more question, if I,
Sure.
I think you gave numbers before, but go over them again.
Sure.
What are you recommending as the limit of our debt for this year?
It's 123 million. I'm trying to do this from memory now. 123, 180. Is that correct, Will? 123 million,
correct.
180,000. I can never remember my kids' birthdays, but I can remember numbers. So what can I say? But we've been reducing that, and I think that lowering our appetite for debt is a good thing. I know it's a job more difficult, but
How does that compare with about 10 years ago? So sort of the height of our profligate and borrowing.
yeah, we did send you a PowerPoint on that a week or two ago. We have definitely been reducing the amount of issuance each year, a recommended amount for issuance. That said, because you already have debt out there that has a payment schedule, we're not seeing the reduction so far in what we call outstanding debt.
So
We're trying to decrease.
if my memory serves, Dick, 10 years ago, when I first came on board with this committee, we were at 142 million in our bank account. We're down to 123 million in our bank account now.
Yep.
And I spent the last year telling virtually every witness who came in, who normally got money from us, to expect less this year because we were anticipating this. Frankly, I was kind of shocked that we were told 123 is okay. I thought we were going to be less than that. But that's the kind of history over the past decade. We've been going down and down and down.
Yeah, and if you look at, as I said, into the 70s, now you have to adjust for inflation. And even when we adjust for inflation, we had a history of very high debt authorizations. We're lowering that. But again, your outstanding debt is a function of previous debt issues. You know, we go out 20 years in our bonding. So, you know, it's going to take a little time to see some reductions there as well.
Thank you.
Okay.
Will, I don't know if you've had a chance to look, particularly at the municipal system, getting to Senator Parent's question.
I don't have a necessarily a question of what we're funding. I was more wondering, what have we been paying for teachers and state employees, and is it comparable?
Okay, again, your number is a higher number. So as you're presenting that number for the vast majority of the folks who are in A and B, that number will be considerably lower, the combined employer and employee contribution. So for comparative purposes, I think it's would be incumbent on us to give you both numbers.
Okay.
What's the benefit difference?
Boy.
I get to retire at 55 versus 62.
Excuse me?
I get to retire at 55 versus 62.
Yep, there's
It's 65 for Group A, Beth. It's
Yep,
62
okay.
for Group B.
okay.
Yep.
And could you
And-
tell me what the rates are? Yes,
Yeah,
please.
so the employee contributions for Group A is 3%. For Group B, it's 5.375%. The benefit formula, though, is much different as well. It's 1.4% times creditable service times AFC versus B is 2.5% times creditable service times AFC. And then there's a little bit of a breakout in there. Same thing for Group B. Group B is 1.7% times creditable service. And then there's the breakout between previous service
Yeah.
and current service.
Okay.
Well,
So-
thanks for that, Will. I just had Sister Rosemary blast out of the past, and I'm suddenly thinking, oh my God, what is she talking about?
Okay. You gave the employee amount. Could you give the employer amount for groups A and B?
The employer is 4.5 and 6 respectively for Group A and Group
Okay.
B.
And our number in the for the employer share in the state and the teachers plan.
So the state system majoritively is in Group F, which is 6.65% for the employees. For the teachers, it's either 5 or 6%, depending on how much service they had at a certain point in time. Like earlier
Yeah.
teachers are 5 and newer teachers are 6.
Right.
And then I have, Beth, if you want, what the
Please.
ADEC represented it as a percentage of payroll.
Yes.
So for last year in 20, for the state retirement system, it was 15.34% employer contribution. And for the teachers, it was 19.41%.
And that
That's
reflects the payment of the unfunded liability. It's about 4 to 5% on the normal cost related to those systems. And the rest of it is to pay down that unfunded liability, the mortgage. And I believe we're at about someplace in between 4 and 5 or 6% on the normal cost right now for the systems. If we make these changes, that percentage will go down.
Senator Parent.
So again, pensions and retirements are math problems, and there's few equations, and I know our return honestly hasn't come close to matching what a private sector's return would have been, over this time period. But the issue I have too is we're putting away enough money, then it sounds like, between an employer and employee, and I get the catch up. But what are we paying for healthcare out of these costs as well, and are we not adequately do we have a pension problem, an actual strict income for retirees problem, or is it we're also paying for healthcare on top of their income?
Okay.
That's the problem.
Okay, healthcare is in a separate fund. They're both in OPEB funds, as we call it. We refer to the teachers as the Retired Medical Health and Medical Benefits Fund, RTHM. And that was not created until 2014. Prior to that, it was taken out of the pension fund. So not only were you not paying the total ADEC from 1990 to 2007 up to 2014, the healthcare was paid for out of a sub fund within pensions, and very, very little of it was appropriated. And becoming treasurer, I had this discussion in 12 and 13 and in 14. We made the changes, the recommended changes, and we had more federal funding, some state funding, and some local investment into the healthcare as well. So that is not a part of these. It really is, and especially in the teachers' case, the lack of funding, the healthcare piece, and the demographics of it, the workforce issues. As I said, the demographics were 50% of the total change of 379 million in the unfunded liability. A lot of turnover of staff, a lot more retirements. Some of that, I believe, is related to the conversations we've had over the last 10 years about teacher-student ratios, the various efforts to make an impact on that, including the most recent Act 46. I'm not going to blame it on Act 46, but those are certainly contributors as we've looked at this issue and how it impacts property tax. When you press the balloon down at the property tax level, it pushes it out on the other end in pensions. And what I've said to every committee over the last several years is that when you look at this, you need to look at it from a big picture of all of it, the full cost of providing these services at the local and the state level. And there's a continued need to do that, and we'd be happy to help with that equation.
So if we reduce the number of teachers to try to bring the student-teacher ratio up, doesn't that add to the number of retirees all of a sudden who are having an impact on the system?
Well, what we've seen in this case is a great number of retirees. Last year was a very large number, partly because of COVID, partly because of the benefit changes that some of that kicked in this year on the healthcare side. On the other side, it depends on what happens with turnover. Are you replacing the people at what salary level? And usually it's at a lower level, so that helps with the operating costs. But you're also adding people with a long-term liability because they're younger and they're going to be working for an extended period of time. That haven't contributed a great deal at this point. So you've got a fairly large liability. It would depend on what happens at the local level in terms of whether they're replacing those individuals, what the turnover looks like, and that will vary from school to school.
Do our conversations here right now potentially have an impact on the number of teachers who want to retire?
I think those are individual choices. If we are looking at the reductions, getting that 379 million target down to a lower level, and even with our recommendations to date, we're only talking about 260 million, which is about 2/3 of that total. That's going to have an impact on teachers' behavior. If you change the benefit structure, people may leave. Depending on how that benefit structure is changed, people are going to make decisions. The actuaries cannot predict that. So they're working off of the current patterns and the current actuarial assumptions. More people might leave. On the other hand, you may have folks that are coming into the system that are paying higher contributions. We've also looked at ways to lengthen the period of time for service before you reach retirement age. So it's kind of a mix, and I can't give you a more precise answer on that, Senator.
The same question would be rising in the state employees situation. If you've got 27 years in as a state employee, and you're hearing these conversations, I don't know whether there's an anticipated run on the bank, so to speak, with people who are deciding it's now rather than 2 years down the road from now.
Again, yes, that's certainly in the mix. It depends on how this all sugars off in the end, in people's behaviors. If you need to work longer to get that full benefit, you may choose to do that, and that would be part of the equation as we're doing this. On the other hand, you may say, I want to get out now before these changes take place. It really depends on where the person is in terms of their retirement and the decisions they're going to make. You know, I'm going to go back a few years to the retirement incentive program that we did back in 09-10, and we did another one in 15-16. And the legislature asked us to do that, and we asked people that were close to that were eligible for normal retirement if they wanted a cash incentive, not out of pension funds, but operating funds to retire. That added about the first year, about $2 million to the ADEC, the required contribution per year. And it also increased, and I don't have the numbers in front of me. It's been a long time, but I'm thinking the number is probably close to 75 to 79 million in increased unfunded liability back with the first one. And to make up for that, what we said is you needed to leave roughly 1/3 of the positions open. So not fill all the positions that were leaving. So we had about 300 retirements, something in that range, a little rough again. And you needed to leave about 100 of those positions open. Between 2010 and 2014, we added 543 positions. That number I remember exactly, 543 positions. Now, I'm not a workforce expert. I don't know whether you needed all those positions and where you needed them, whether it's in corrections, whether it's in human services, wherever they might be needed. That's not my role, but I can tell you that that added to the equation, not just the unfunded liability because of the retirement incentive, but also the backfill and those people. It added to the liabilities of the system. So as we make decisions about workforce, we need to keep that in mind.
Well, some of us were actually arguing back then that adding these new faces to the payroll was going to be problematic at some point. And I suppose it's useless to say I told you so now, but
yeah,
I'm glad to hear there's more substance to the conversation now, and it doesn't become a party issue, if you will.
Yeah. Well, again,
I saw another hand with a question. Corey,
Yes.
Was that you?
Oh.
Okay.
So if I could add to that, again, I'm not a workforce expert. I can't tell you what the number of employees that you need and where they should be distributed. I can only tell you the impacts on the financial side, not the policy side, but they were significant.
Well, the conversation about whether we need them or whether we can afford them, I think the afford question is finally coming up to the question of do we need them? And I think too long that has been in the background in comparison of do we want them? But
yeah,
we're moving in another direction. So
you bet.
we need to get into the specifics of your recommendations.
So we took a look at a number of ideas and suggestions and solutions that have been done in other states as well. So we looked at increasing employee contributions. We looked at something that's very difficult and painful, which is the cost of living adjustments that people have in retirement. So what we left, our recommendation is not to do anything for people that are already retired. They came in, they did an estimate when they retired, they had that number, they're retired, they have a retirement in place now. But what we said is for actives that are now going into, will go into retirement at some point in time, that we need to reduce or eliminate the COLA associated with them. And we do have some recommendations that do both. We also talked about increasing the years that you use for average final compensation. As Will was saying, you take the salary, the average salary, and you apply a benefit formula to it. For state employees in Group F, which is the majority of the classified employees, that's 3 years. And so what we're talking about is either adding 2 years to that to get to 5, or 4 years to get to 7, and taking a look at that option. We looked at revisions to vesting. Right now, you're 5 years in for vesting. It's counterintuitive, but that increasing that did not save any dollars. We also looked at rule of 87 or 90, basically saying take your age and years of service. So right now, in the majority of Group F, and again, folks, correct me if I'm wrong on this, it's age 62 and 30 years of service. If you're in a subsequent group, people that were hired after 7108, I believe the age is 65. You can nod your head, Will, one way or the other.
I am.
There you go. And rule of 87. So a combined age and years of service reaching 87. We took a look at what would happen if you expanded that to the group prior to 7108 and or moving people to rule of 90. We looked at the early retirement. Did we have enough? There's a penalty for early retiring versus your normal retirement. Are we using the right actuarial equivalents to that? We took a look at the maximum benefit. Even if that formula is in place with the AFC, the years of service, and your salary, is there a maximum benefit change? You can get up to 50% in some cases, up to 60% in others, took a look at that. We also talked about dedicated revenue sources, and frankly, as COVID money becomes available, we want to take a look at that COVID money that does not have strings tied to it. You've been having strings tied to most of what you received to date. Our understanding is that the Biden administration will be looking at a very large package that has a significant amount of state money, state and local money, and presumably with some less strings attached. And depending on how they do this, whether it's whether they put in the reconciliation process at the federal level, we could see something as early as February on those. So we'll have to wait and see how that all again sugars off. We would want to put some of that perhaps in a reserve fund and use that to kind of, the ADEC. So if it was growing, you could kind of glide path that. And so it doesn't have such a big impact on the base budget. So those are the things that we looked at. What we ended up with is some different recommendations for each group because the severity of the problem is different among the state versus the teachers. So in the state system, we looked at 4 possible options. One was to apply that elimination of the COLA for all actives upon retirement. And again, the increase in the unfunded liability was $225 million. This would generate $238 million. So we would meet that in a little bit. If looking at the increase in the ADEC that we have, 36 million, this would account for about 35.3. So we're talking about $700,000 difference. We also looked at eliminating the COLA, but keeping it for people that were within 5 years of retirement. That actually cut the impact on the COLA in half. Instead of 238 million, 116.7. So in order to get close to the target, we took a look at increases in the average final compensation taking a look at rule of 90 and implementing that. That got us to around 256 million. So it was a little larger, but we have not, when you put those together, we've been looking at these as one piece. In a few cases, we've combined them, and in the actuarial science part, the pieces of the whole are not the sum of the result, but you end up having some combination. So AFC might play off a rule of 90 and so on, so that you might have a reduction because of those combinations. The third one that we put together was again eliminate the COLA with folks that within 5 years of retirement, adding 2 years to the AFC, so a little less than the other, and rule of 90. It doesn't quite get you there. And then the final one, which is the one that we essentially recommended, was eliminating the COLA for any amount in retirement over 24,000. So if you had a retirement of 30,000, the first 24,000 would be covered by COLA, and the remainder would not. That was the idea. There was to create some type of retirement security type of net for folks. Add again, that wouldn't generate the same as eliminated at all. So we added 2 years to the AFC, continued with the rule of 90, and increased the contribution by 35 bips, or 0.35%. And that doesn't quite get you there. It's about 220 million, but it's a good way down the road. So that's what we suggested in the state. We've had meetings. I met with about 350 state employees and answered about questions for a little over 3 hours. I've also met with their executive board, their council, which is over 100. I've met with one of the chapters, the Chittenden County chapters, and clearly the reaction we're getting is the elimination of the COLA and the rule of 90 are the big sticking points. So we're continuing to have conversations around that. That does not mean anyone is ready to say yes or even going to get there. You know, I can't speak for the employee groups. They haven't made any decisions, but we're communicating with them about the recommendations, the theory behind it, and what other alternatives people might have and whether they work or don't. The teacher system. The bogey is bigger, the 379 million target. And so our recommendations were to eliminate COLAs for all members upon retirement. And that gets you 165 million of the total. Revise the AFC to 7 years. So from 3 to 7, that was about $81 million in savings. For the folks that aren't currently classified under rule of 90, put that in. That gets you to 254 million, which again is roughly 2/3 of the way to the 379 million. Those same things, the ADEC target was to reduce it by 60 million. This gets you to about 52 million. So a bigger impact on the ADEC. And again, these are preliminary recommendations, you know, subject to further discussion. We met with about 1,000 teachers on a town meeting, did get their input on this, and we're continuing to try to work with the stakeholders there. Your stakeholders, getting you involved, the retirement boards involved in this as well, and trying to come up with a solution with your help and your support so that we can resolve this situation. It doesn't change the fact that we will still have an unfunded liability, and we need to continue that plan to retire it by 2038, but it makes a big impact on these. I would also point out that the trustee boards have been supportive. Both the teacher and the state board have directed us to, as I said, to create the report and to come back with recommendations as of January 15th. Subsequent to that, both groups acknowledged that they received the report and said, we've received the treasurer's report and recognize that the ADEC for fiscal year 22 and beyond may not be sustainable, and as a result recognizes that changes in benefit levels to reduce the unfunded liability may be required. So that to me is a statement of support that we need to take a look at this and make some directions there. They have also asked us to look at certain strategies to reduce that and asked about how that impacts all groups in the state system. That would be Group F, Group C, and Group D. The F is the majority of the employees, C is the state law enforcement, and and D are the judges. So taking a look at those, the Vistas board did give us some information, some direction with respect to COLA options. They're looking at, again, some type of safety net and looking at the employee contributions. We recommended an 8% employee contribution, which is up from 5% if you're a person started before July of 14 or 6. So we would go from 5 to 8 in some cases. And I would point out in 2009 and 10, the employee contribution for teachers was 3.54%. So this is a fairly significant jump over the years. they're painful. These are painful recommendations. They reduce people's benefits. I'm awake, at night thinking about this, but the consequences of no action are, in my opinion, too severe. If you don't do anything, I think we undermine the long-term sustainability of these plans. We create a situation where we may have to look at other structures. And as I've said to the employee groups, if you need to participate in this process, because if you don't, you're ceding your decision making to other entities, and it will have, in my opinion, and again, I cannot speak for a bond rating agency, but I do believe it will have an impact on our future bond rating.
Senator McCormick.
Thanks, Madam Treasurer. You mentioned groups of employees. Were these groups set up by their collective bargaining agent, or were you going directly to the groups exclusive of the collective bargaining agent?
Okay, so pensions are not subject to collective bargaining. Neither is the funding. The health benefits are part of collective bargaining for the state. I can't tell you how they're done at the local level, but the funding of them, the issue of pre-funding, is not a decision within collective bargaining. The structure of the group plans, Group A, B, C, and D in the municipal system, Group C, F, C, and D in the state system, Group C, and there's a predecessor system. Those are set by recommendations from the boards to the legislature. So ultimately, you set those, and you set the contribution rates. The boards set the actuarial assumptions based on independent work by the actuaries. So it's complex. I would also say that I've worked in other environments. I worked for Commonwealth of Massachusetts, the state of Connecticut, and the state of, well, not the state of Connecticut, the town of West Hartford, and the state of town in New York that participated in the state system. All two of those, New York and Massachusetts, are significantly larger pension in terms of membership, significantly larger pension plans, and again, in terms of measurement in members. I have never encountered a system that is as complex as ours for the number of people we have. We have different groups, then we have carve-outs in those different groups, and we're extraordinarily complex in the way it's structured. And when we have new ideas, we create a new variation, and again, a carve-out of benefits, for instance. That doesn't mean it's bad, but it is very complicated.
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to cut off the conversation because I understand, Beth, you're getting the hook to get into Ways and Means.
Okay.
I appreciate you coming. Committee, you may have more questions. We may need to have a continuing conversation with the treasurer. Just so the committee is aware, we have Adam Gresham coming in on Tuesday. He was supposed to be in today, but he's rescheduled for Tuesday. So we'll have a chance to flesh this out quite a bit more with the administration.
Okay. Well,
Beth,
thank you
thank you very much for coming.
Thank you, Treasurer, very much.
William
Thank you.
Maslin, thank you as
I won't
well.
say pleasure. I won't say pleasure because these are tough conversations, but I appreciate the work that you folks do and our commitment to work together on this. And I'm going to sign off and get over to Ways and Means. So thank
We appreciate your courage.
you. Thank you very much. We're
Thank you.
going to work together. Thank you.
Thank you.
Committee, hang tough for a minute. The conversation was supposed to continue this afternoon, and I did not realize she was getting yanked out to go to Ways and Means, but we also had Adam Gresham on for another part of today, and he canceled out late. I don't remember who was here when I first said that, but the upshot is this is a continuing conversation. We're all becoming very much aware of what's going on, and hopefully we'll have a lot more conversation about it.
Something's gonna happen, seriously.
Yeah.
You've been saying that since I've been on his committee, and I keep going through times when you were yelling, "What's the plan? What's the plan?" And it's kind of pointless, I guess, to say we told you so at this stage. We've all got to be
She came
committed.
a long way. She came a long way because she was adamant against it. And now, after Dave Coates and a lot of folks have been talking about it for years, there's no end in sight. So she has changed a lot. I mean, she's come around. So
And there's no question that there's going to be another round of monies coming from Washington with hopefully less restrictions. And there's not a better time that we're not ever going to have liquidity like we have right now to tackle this.
but the problem is if you pay it and don't change the system, you're in the
Exactly. No, exactly. It's
But
got to
either-
change, but to get you somewhere
Get
closer
to
to
paid
even.
off, right.
You're right.
That's right.
Exactly.
We've also got the additional conversation to have about constantly increasing new faces to the state's payroll. Even in situations where we really think it's a great idea to have X, X has gotten to be part of the conversation that we're now in, whether we like that or not. But I think it's important for everybody to hear these kinds of conversations from the treasurer especially. And we all start to get on the same page. It's time to really tighten belts. With that pleasant thought, I guess I will see you guys tomorrow. Denise, I'd like to have you hang on the line, and to our audience out there in the live YouTube world, have a great afternoon.